This is True News, the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help us God. Russia continued to pound Ukrainian energy and public works targets throughout the weekend, and on Monday, nearly 2 million Ukrainians are without electricity. Western leaders fear the war is trending toward uncontrolled escalation. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu held telephone meetings with defense officials in Great Britain, France, and Turkey to discuss what he called a rapidly deteriorating situation. Now, at the top of everybody's list of concerns today is talk of a dirty bomb that would spread radiological contamination throughout Ukraine and surrounding European neighbors. Let's start by discussing Russia's relentless two-week bombing campaign of Ukraine's power grid infrastructure. Voice of America News says wide-scale Russian attacks target Ukraine's energy grid.
So we're now seeing that pounding take place, Rick, and so Russia has launched a new wide-scale missile strike on Ukraine's civilian energy sites, causing power outages nationwide. That's according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He said this in his regular video address late Saturday. Ukrainian authorities say nearly 1.5 million households, now over 2 million across the country, have been left without electricity. Russia has intensified its strikes on Ukraine's power stations, water supply systems, and other key infrastructure over the past 2 weeks.
Doc, this bombing of infrastructure started immediately after Ukraine blew up the Crimean Bridge.
Yes.
Well, they didn't destroy it, but when the bomb that went off on Crimea Bridge. So I think that was on a Saturday.
Yes.
And then on Monday, the following Monday, this bombing campaign started.
So 3 sustained weeks of bombing. So it's been 3 weeks since that.
But they've been
attack.
targeting infrastructure such as electricity, water, public works. One of our employees last week, I think you were in my office, I don't know, he showed me a photograph, a satellite image of Ukraine.
Oh,
Did you see
the lights
that?
out in Ukraine?
Yes.
Yeah, it looked like North Korea. I mean, there was just a few spots of light, but you could outline the border of Ukraine.
Yeah, it was just like you drew a map of Ukraine. You saw lights on in all the neighboring European cities, but Ukraine was dark.
Right.
That was shocking, and that picture was about a week old. So this bombing campaign is having a staggering impact on Ukraine right now.
But this bombing campaign shouldn't be a surprise because Russia said this is what they would do as they move forward. We're talking more about how the pot will be anteed up a little bit more as the West and Mr. Zelensky in particular seeks to draw more attention to this.
Doc, retired U.S. General David Petraeus, former CIA director, gave an interview to the French newspaper L'Express, and he said he could foresee a U.S.-led multinational force invading Ukraine.
Well, at least they're admitting it now, and so.
And he said it wouldn't have to be NATO. That's what was interesting. He said it didn't necessarily have to be NATO.
That's an interesting twist to this. Now, the U.S. and its allies might directly intervene in the ongoing conflict between Moscow and Kiev, even if there is no threat to any NATO member state. That's according to retired U.S. Army General David Petraeus. He was speaking to France's L'Express Weekly on Saturday. Washington might form a new coalition of the willing in such a scenario and use it instead of NATO. Petraeus, who has also briefly served as the CIA director, believes.
Okay, that's the line right there. General Petraeus said the U.S. may form what he called a coalition of the willing to go to war with Russia. And it doesn't have to be NATO. If they have not activated Article 5 of the NATO treaty, NATO can't get involved. There has to be something that activates Article 5. There has to be a direct attack on a NATO nation. What he is suggesting is that President Biden organize a coalition like President George Herbert Walker Bush organized that massive coalition of nations that invaded, attacked when the first Gulf War,
Right.
when Saddam Hussein took control of Kuwait. Yeah. So who would be in that coalition? I mean, Great Britain. I can think of several NATO nations. Is it an indication that there is cold feet in some NATO nations, that they're unwilling to go to war?
Well, if there's not cold feet now, there will be cold feet here in just a couple of months.
And cold noses.
Right.
And everything else is going to be cold.
And that's got to be a factor playing into the decisions of countries all throughout Europe, all the way from Finland down to Estonia. I mean, they've got to be thinking that, even though they talk big words sometimes, but a coalition like this would give an opportunity for nations to be able to support efforts in Ukraine without directly involving a full NATO presence there.
But who would do the fighting? Who would go with the U.S.? Who would
That's a great question.
Who would march into Ukraine and directly battle Russian forces if it's not NATO? Is it Australia? Japan? Would Japan send troops to Ukraine? Israel?
This is such a bold idea here from General Petraeus, and you know they've got to be talking about this right now if Petraeus is talking about it out in the open like this.
Yes. So somebody is talking to the nations and finding out, would you sign up? Would you join in? I really don't know. I don't know. Great Britain, I would suspect. Poland. I think there would be some NATO members that would participate. What I think he's suggesting here, without saying it, is inside NATO, there is reluctance to go to war against Russia.
Sure. I would
They'll
say
send
so.
weapons. They'll send weapons, but they sure don't want to send troops.
Right.
And they don't want Russian ICBMs hitting their cities.
And yet there's other nations, too, that seem to be bucking for a fight, as we'd say back home, like Poland, for instance, or even the U.S., even the U.K. I mean, you know, the three of them would want to be directly involved in some form or fashion.
Would Canada get involved?
They seem to talk that way. So, and there's such a large Ukrainian presence in Canada, they may even be compelled to, because of that, to defend, the motherland, so to speak. And so a Russian could take some action in Ukraine that would be so shocking and so horrific that it would prompt a response from the U.S. and other nations, he said, adding that they might react in one way or another, but as a multinational force led by the U.S. and not as a NATO force. Now, the military alliance would still likely be bound by its treaty and would only join the conflict if Article 5 is invoked. For instance, if one of its members is attacked, the general believes. Petraeus also said that Moscow is not interested in escalating the conflict and turning it into a global war. A wider conflict is the last thing Russia President Vladimir Putin needs right now, he added. No, Russia doesn't want to get involved in a global conflict, but they just want to be left alone in this matter.
So is General Petraeus suggesting that there's not unity in NATO to invade Ukraine on behalf of Ukraine and fight the Russians, but there might be several NATO countries willing to do it, like the U.S., maybe Poland, maybe Great Britain, and obviously they're going to be attacked by Russia.
Right.
And so, if they're attacked, guess what?
Then you
have to invoke Article 5. Is that the plan? They're going to force NATO to get into the fight? That the French really don't want to fight? The Germans really don't want to fight? They don't want to end this war, but Petraeus has said, we're going to have to do something to make them get in the war. That's what it sounds like to me. The next one, this is the Ukrainian Pravda, and Mr. Zelensky said, the world should warn Russia that it will be hit in the event of a nuclear strike on Bankova Street. Now, Bankova Street is
it's like the Pennsylvania Avenue.
It's like the equivalent of Pennsylvania Avenue. It's where the presidential home is at and other important government structures.
Right.
And so he fears that there's going to be a missile attack on his residence. I don't know why he's worried. Most likely he's in London. There's a guy that made $40 billion working from home.
That's right. In a month. Yeah, 40 billion. I made 40 billion last month working from home, doing Zoom calls.
He should sell a video course on how he did it.
Well, President Volodymyr Zelensky is convinced that Russia should receive a warning from the world about a strike on the decision-making center in the Russian Federation in the event that Russia launches a nuclear strike on Bankova Street, and that's a street in Kiev where a lot of the government buildings are located. Mr. Zelensky said, regarding the use of nuclear weapons other than a nuclear plant, I will give an example. Now we sit and hear constant calls that Russia should strike at the decision-making center, he's saying in Ukraine. How should the world respond? It doesn't matter if Ukraine is a NATO country or not. This is happening in Europe. No one is allowed to blackmail like a terrorist. Now, if the message is that there will be a strike at the decision-making center, the world's response should be as follows. Look, if you strike Bankova Street, there will be a strike at the place where you are, you who gives the task of killing people. If you do that, then in a second, regardless of the result of your strike, there will be a strike at your decision-making center in your state. So what Mr. Zelensky is basically saying, the world should warn Moscow that if they do a direct attack on Kiev, then there will be a direct attack on Moscow.
This comedian talks big.
And he's not funny anymore. He wasn't funny in the first place. But
no, he wasn't funny. He just made stupid, obscene videos. But now he's a paid clown. He was a paid clown before. Now he's a paid clown by the banksters.
And in a military uniform.
And in a military uniform. And he's directing a war. And a lot of people are getting killed because of his stupidity and his arrogance. But he's getting paid. I mean, let's get real. He's getting paid. You know he's skimming a lot of money. He's not going to go back and do stand-up comedy after this war.
No. No, they're going to build statues of him all over the world.
Okay,
he's got to go dedicate.
So he's talking big and he's telling the world. Look, this is Zelensky talking.
Churchill.
Yeah. The most important man in the world.
The number one Jew in the world.
Yes, according to Jerusalem Post. You listen to me. This is what you should do. If Russia attacks the street where I live on, then you have to blow up Russia. If you don't blow up Russia, you're not a man. I mean, this guy's sitting somewhere in a most likely, you know, in a green screen doing his videos every day. In some other country, I don't think he's in Ukraine. I really don't believe he's in Ukraine. All indication is his wife is in London. I just don't see this guy being, you know, a serious leader. That the only thing he's doing every day is pumping out propaganda videos.
Right, making Zoom calls. That's all he's really been doing, either making a video or on a call with somebody.
And shaming countries for not sending him more money or more weapons. If they don't send him what he wants, he shames them. And this guy's been getting away with it since February. Some of the countries, I think, are getting upset with him. But what he's saying here is, I'm hearing talk that Putin's going to blow up my presidential palace. And if he does, then you have to blow up Russia.
And he's assuming he thinks that's where the decision-making center is.
Yes.
We know the decision-making centers are not in Kiev. They're in Brussels, they're in London, they're in Washington.
Well, while we're talking about London, Doc, this next story is the London Times. And this was Sunday's edition of the London Times, how the West is preparing for Putin to go nuclear.
So the Western countries are making a contingency plan, or several contingency plans, to deal with chaos at home in case of nuclear war in Ukraine, officials said yesterday, as the threat of a battlefield strike by President Putin grew. The measures could include issuing leaflets on how to survive a nuclear attack or ways to ease panic buying amid fears the fallout could reach Western Europe and beyond. President Putin's threats to use nuclear weapons in recent weeks have sent alarm bells ringing across NATO, with the alliance engaging in discussions behind closed doors as to how it will respond to such an eventuality.
Okay, so the Western nations, they're having high-level contingency planning meetings on how the Western nations are going to respond to the use of Russian nuclear weapons. And at the top of their list, they're going to hand out leaflets.
Yes. Tell people, don't panic.
And go inside. Don't look out the window.
Put aluminum foil on your windows.
That's the plan. Seriously. They're assuming that they're going to survive a nuclear attack. Your leaflets aren't going to help you. But apparently that's what they're planning in London and other European cities. They're going to hand out flyers and tell people,
don't worry,
stay calm, and these nukes won't hurt you. We've got another quote from the London Times article.
Yeah, some observers now believe there is a realistic prospect of the Russian leader using a tactical nuclear weapon against Ukraine, either on land or firing into the Black Sea. Asked if there were contingency plans in place to deal with the fallout of a strike in the West, such as a way or dealing with panic buying or distributing booklets on how to survive a nuclear attack, one Western official said, as you would expect, the government is conducting prudent planning for a range of possible scenarios, of which that is one.
Okay, let's think about this, Doc. Let's set aside how Western nations will respond to the use, let's say, a tactical nuke, not a full-size warhead, but let's say a tactical nuke that blows up Mr. Zelensky's Bankova Street. What if it just is vaporized and is gone? You know, the core of Kiev, just completely vaporized. 10, 15-mile radius by a tactical nuke. Let's set aside how the West would respond militarily. What happens in European cities? What happens in Great Britain? What happens in the United States and in Canada? I'm just talking about the public.
Yes.
What happens?
Well, and there's something I think psychologically will happen. There will be suddenly a switch that goes off, and we now live in a new age.
And what will be the reaction?
People will panic.
And if they panic, what do?
They
Doc,
buy things, they stock up. You're going to see shelves go bare. You're going to see gas stations without gas. You're going to, just generally, you'll see people just not go to work. They'll just quit going to work. Why go to work? We live in a world where nuclear bombs are falling now. And so something will trigger in the minds, especially those who are connected to media and social outlets as well.
So we can safely assume there will be widespread disruption of society.
Yes.
Through fear and panic, even though the radiation has not even come close to the European cities, London, United States, Canada, Australia. But the mental response will be fear and panic. We've really never talked this out. You and I have always been focused on how would NATO respond? What would be the response of world leaders? We've never really talked about what's the response of the public.
Right.
And the public's response is going to have a great impact on how the leaders respond. Because the public, Doc, might just tell the world leaders, knock it off. Enough is enough. This fight has gone on too far. Don't send another weapon to Ukraine. Defund Zelensky. Make peace with Russia. Stop it. That's the risk that they have. I've never thought about this, Doc, that the West is at risk that public opinion swings against them radically.
Oh, you're absolutely right.
Extremely. Where people go, that's enough. I don't want to hear any more talk. I don't want to hear Lindsey Graham one more time talk about killing Putin. I don't want to hear any general on Fox News talking about nuking Russia. People will be terrified. Maybe that's the Russian strategy. They talked about, this theory that Putin's going to just explode a nuke in the Black Sea. For what? What purpose?
There's nothing of Ukraine's in the Black Sea. Why would they blow up anything?
There have been nuclear tests since the 60s, and that doesn't scare people. That would be the same as a nuclear test. But when a city disappears, that's different. Now people have something that they can relate to. There was a city yesterday, today it's not there. that could be your city. And if the politicians and the warmongers and the banksters and the think tank guys and all these people continue to push for this war, then the public's going to realize we really are at risk of dying. And what are we dying for? Some guy in a green T-shirt. This is it? What are we fighting for? Now, I think the public is going to demand make peace with Russia.
But do you see our leaders actually doing that?
Oh, Doc.
Or would they have to, at that point, just double down?
Well, if they double down, they're at risk of total uprising inside their countries.
See, I think that'll happen.
Now they've got to put down civil unrest in their countries.
Suddenly, what's happening in Ukraine isn't quite as important anymore.
That's right,
then, is it?
because they have civil unrest in there. Remember, we're going into the winter.
That's right.
Okay.
It hasn't gotten tough yet.
It hasn't gotten tough. The first unrest will be in Europe. It'll spread. It'll spread to the United States. The economy is going to change very soon. And the West wants this. The Western leaders want this war over before winter. Putin wants winter so that he can end the war on his terms.
Right.
The West wants to end it now before winter. They want to end it on their terms. It's all about the winter. If you get to the winter, Putin's in the driver's seat. If they can force his hand now, Doc, then they're in the driver's seat.
Right.
But he might just do something that totally shocks them. Where now they have to make a decision. Do they live up to the big talk that they've been doing for months? Or do they back down and say, you know what, this guy really is going to use the nukes? Because there'll be some people demanding, we have to hit him hard now.
Before he uses nukes.
But if you say that, you're telling the public he's going to use them.
Right.
And he's not going to use them on Ukraine. The next one's going to be London. It's going to be Washington. It's going to be Houston, Texas. It's going to be Tampa, Florida. It's going to be Pensacola, Florida. It's going to be Norfolk, Virginia. And people are going to start thinking about this, the reality of it. But anyhow, we're seeing in recent days more talk about the West getting ready for nuclear war. The London Guardian newspaper, West makes plans to avoid panic if Russia uses nuclear bomb in Ukraine.
And this is from last week, Rick. Western officials are engaged in prudent planning behind the scenes to prevent chaos and panic in their home countries in the event Russia was to detonate a nuclear bomb in or near Ukraine. Although a nuclear crisis is considered highly unlikely, the insider said officials internationally were re-examining plans to provide emergency support and reassurance to populations fearful of nuclear escalation. So hints of thinking emerged in a briefing by an official on Friday who was asked if there would be measures in place to prevent panic buying or people fleeing cities en masse in fear of escalation after a nuclear event. Governments were engaged in prudent planning for a range of possible scenarios, said the Western official who was speaking on condition of anonymity, although they stressed that any use of nuclear weapons by Russia in the war would be abhorrent. But Rick, we have to also consider the possibility that Russia might not be the only one that would use a nuclear weapon. There are other players in this as well, including Ukraine. And so
the talk this weekend is General Sergei Shoigu, who is also the defense minister of Russia. He made an accusation that Russia has intelligence that Ukraine is going to detonate a radiological dirty bomb.
Yes.
That would spread. A dirty bomb doesn't do destruction like a nuclear blast, but it spreads radiation. What has been going on all weekend, Doc, is Russia and Ukraine trading back and forth allegations that each side is planning to detonate a dirty bomb. and blame the other side, a false flag.
And this hasn't been just at the media level or anything like that. This has gone up to the highest levels of command and political structure, even among some Western nations. And so
the Western newspapers are saying the Russians, this is a dirty trick by the Russians. The Russians are planning to do a false flag and blame the Ukrainians. But the Russians are saying the Ukrainians are planning a false flag to blame the Russians.
Right.
One side is lying, one side's telling the truth. Both are telling the same story. They're pointing their fingers at the other side saying, you're going to detonate a dirty bomb. That's a high indication that there's going to be a dirty bomb
by somebody.
By somebody soon. Okay? But that could be the trigger event that causes one side or the other to take more drastic actions. So let's take a look at what this story. This is from Inter. No, this is TASS, right?
Right. And so the gentleman you see on the screen there is Lieutenant General Igor Kirilov. He's the head of their nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare division of the Russian army. So this is him delivering an address here related to this particular topic here, where we're talking about what he's saying and what other members of the Russian military and political structures are saying. Ukraine's plan to launch a dirty bomb and to blame Russia for it. So the Kiev regime plans to blow up a low-yield nuclear weapon to accuse Russia of using weapons of mass destruction in the Ukrainian theater of operations. This was announced on Monday by the head of the Radiation, Chemical, and Biological Protection of Troops of the Russian Armed Forces, Lieutenant General Igor Kirilov. He said the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation has information that the Kiev regime is planning a provocation related to the detonation of a so-called dirty bomb or a low-yield nuclear weapon. The purpose of the provocation is to accuse Russia of using weapons of mass destruction in the Ukrainian theater of operations and thereby launch a powerful anti-Russian campaign aimed at undermining confidence in Moscow, he said. Now, this particular story has legs, as Rick said, because it is getting the attention of the ministries of defense of about a half a dozen nations right now. So this is number 20 for control here, this from Interfax. The heads of the general staffs of Russia and the United States are in discussions about the possible use of a dirty bomb by Ukraine. So
we got General Milley's in these calls now.
That's right.
That's the level that this has reached.
I mean, that's where the Russians are talking to the Americans.
At the level of General Milley.
Right. And so the Russian Ministry of Defense reported that the possible use of a dirty bomb by Ukraine was discussed on Monday during a telephone conversation between the chief of the general staff of the Russian Federation, Valery Gerasimov, and the chairman of the Committee of Chiefs of Staff of the United States Armed Forces, Mark Milley. During the conversation, the discussion with the American side of the situation related to the possible use of a dirty bomb by Ukraine was continued, the Russian Defense Ministry said in a statement. So let's just talk about this for just a moment. We have not had very many conversations with Russia since, these conflicts started, usually at State Department level. In fact, I recall a story, I think it was back in July or August, that basically we cut off military communications with Russia. But now you've got the highest levels of the Russian military, their equivalent of Mark Milley, talking to Mark Milley over here.
And the Russians rang his phone.
Yes.
They got General Milley on the phone and said, look, we have information, we have intelligence that your buddies, the Ukrainians, are going to detonate a dirty bomb. Now, I don't know what General Milley replied. I'm assuming he said, give me the evidence, tell me what you know. Let's take a look at it. But what you're saying, Doc, is this is being taken so seriously that you've got the highest level generals of Russia talking to the highest level general of the United States of America about a rumor. That's what this is a rumor.
Well, it might be more than a rumor. It might be actual intelligence that the Russians have.
Well,
so, but because that was his second call. His first call was to the defense chief in the UK, Tony Radican. He said prior to this, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that Gerasimov had a telephone conversation with the chief of the British defense staff. During the conversation, discussions continued with the British side of the situation related to the possible use of a dirty bomb by Ukraine. Specifically, the Russian Foreign Ministry said in a statement. So this obviously has more than just a rumor to it. It's at least the Russians are dealing with it that way. They also had conversations with other nations too. It says on the 23rd, the Russian Defense Ministry reported on Shoigu's telephone conversations with the French Defense Minister, Sebastian Lecornu, the Turkish Defense Minister, Hulusi Akar, and British Defense Minister Ben Wallace. In reports following these talks, the Russian Ministry of Defense noted that Shoigu expressed his concerns about possible provocations by Ukraine with the use of a dirty bomb. On Monday, the Russian military said they had information about Kiev's plans to organize a provocation using a dirty bomb or a low-yield nuclear weapon. Igor Kirilov, head of the Radiation, Chemical and Biological Protection Forces, we saw earlier, said that Ukraine is completing the creation of such a bomb and can disguise its use as a low-yield Russian nuclear weapon to accuse Moscow of using tactical nuclear weapons. So, Rick, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that that will occur. What I find fascinating about this particular story is they've made this very public. We've talked to the military heads of a half a dozen nations about this situation, and we are warning you right now. We've got intelligence that Ukraine is planning to use a dirty bomb.
If there was a dirty bomb explosion, I don't see the strategic benefit to Russia.
Neither do I. Why would they use a dirty bomb? There'd be no benefit to them to use a dirty bomb.
They'd just use a clean one.
Yes, and do a surgical strike.
They'd take out downtown Kiev and remove Bankova Street. They're not going to do some sloppy dirty bomb and just spread radiation around and kill a lot of people.
But the spreading of the radiation is the key, isn't it?
It is.
Because if the radiation leaks into, let's say, a NATO country, guess what? You can invoke Article 5. We got to stop the Russians now.
That's right. Plus just the accusation. Look what those Russians did. They released radiation in the country. Again, there's no benefit to Russia doing this. If Russia knows that when they use any nuclear weapon, they better do it. They better get the job done, because the West is going to respond. So I don't see any benefit to them doing something sneaky, like we're going to go out here and plant a dirty bomb behind a building and spray a lot of radiation around.
But there would be a lot of advantage to Ukraine doing a dirty bomb.
Yes.
Because that means you got to get the world involved.
Yes, because Zelensky could make videos and Zoom calls out his wazoo for weeks, demanding the world strike Russia. So, which side do I believe? I believe the Russians have something on the Ukrainians. I think they know something, and I think they've called Milley. I know they've called Milley and Ben Wallace and others and said, this is what we've got, and you better tell your boy to back off.
Well, and it's even gone so far as coming up before the Security Council of the United Nations, Mr. Lavrov is planning on bringing this up in discussion, either was to happen today or possibly tomorrow. Mr. Lavrov stressed that Russia had reliable evidence Ukraine may be planning the use of a dirty bomb. He said the risk of Kiev using a dirty bomb will be on the agenda of the UN Security Council. Today or tomorrow, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov told the media on the sidelines of the 19th annual meeting of the Valdai International Discussion Club Monday. He said at this meeting, detailed information indicating the institutions that may be commissioned for this purpose was conveyed through the Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu during his contacts with his counterparts in the U.S., Britain, France, and Turkey. So it seems like these reports are being confirmed, Rick.
They are.
And more contacts are planned between our defense ministries, Lavrov said.
Yeah.
It's almost as if these countries have confirmed some of the information that Russia has.
And why would the Russians demand a meeting of the UN Security Council if they're the ones planning to release the bomb?
Right. Now, the other side would say that's just how tricky those Russians are. You know, they'll go out of their way to say it's not us and then do it anyway. Mm-hmm. But I think you laid out the case perfectly. There's no benefit to Russia to dropping a dirty bomb. First of all, you've got the impact that the radiation itself would cause over a wide area, maybe involving NATO, and Russia doesn't want to fight with NATO, at least not right now, not at this very moment.
Maybe this winter.
And so when we're seeing all this diplomatic and military act talk going, when there's communication, the possibility of peace is there. Mm-hmm. And maybe all this talk about dirty bomb, maybe someone will finally say, you know, at least the Russians and the Americans are talking. At least the Russians and the British are talking now.
They're talking on the military side, not the diplomatic side.
Right.
The generals are talking to each other because they're saying to each other, you know, this is going to get really bad.
And you know what generals are, Rick? Generals are old soldiers who didn't die. Mm-hmm. Okay? So, and the reason they didn't die is because they stayed alive. Mm-hmm. They've made decisions in their lives to keep themselves and other people alive, not to get killed. Mm-hmm. So, Shoigu on Sunday held telephone conversations with the British Defense Secretary Ben Wallace, also with French Armed Forces Minister Sebastian Lecornu, and the Turkish National Defense Minister Hulusi Akar. The Russian Defense Minister briefed his counterparts on the concerns about possible provocations by Ukraine involving the use of a dirty bomb. And then on Friday and Sunday, he talked by telephone with the Pentagon's chief, Lloyd Austin.
And so Lloyd Austin's in this also.
Yes, sir.
He went up to the Secretary of Defense of the United States. This next article in the Times of London it caught my eye because the Western media is now dealing with the fact that Putin called the West satanic.
Right.
Apparently, it stung, and it has bit them, and they have to respond to it.
Yeah, you can call us in the West demented capitalists. You can call us evil imperialists, but don't call us satanic. We take that personally, mm-hmm. I guess, right?
Yeah,
so,
and Putin gave examples of why the West is satanic.
Right, and so from the London Times, from imperialist to evil capitalists, Kremlin propaganda has had many names over the decades for Western countries. Now with the Russian army on the run in Ukraine, at least they admit it now, President Putin has a new slur, Satanist. Although Putin was once a KGB officer in the officially atheist Soviet Union, he is increasingly seeking to portray himself as a staunch defender of Christian values against what he depicts as the demonic and degenerate West.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. Has the West become demonic and degenerate?
Well, what would a demonic and degenerate civilization look like, Rick?
It would look like modern America right now. It's pretty wicked. It's so wicked I can't even think about it. It troubles me to think about what we've become, particularly just in the last 2 years.
Yes.
The rapid descent into darkness has been so stunning in the past 2 years. The wickedness that's been released in the land. It's like portals. I don't believe in portals, but it's like
it's like a door open, a floodgate is open, let's say.
It's like there was something opened and demonic powers flooded into America at a level of strength we've never seen in the history of this nation, maybe in the world. The things that are going on in this country are just staggering. They're hard to comprehend. And it's particularly this. Sexual immorality has always been in the world.
Right.
Right? That's always been there. I mean, adultery, homosexuality, it's always been there.
But generally here in the U.S., the preaching of the gospel message has restrained that from being openly, propagated,
but
if you will.
But what we've never seen is extreme homosexuality where men are dressed as women, as drag queens, and brazenly going into elementary schools and performing sexual dances in front of 5- and 6-year-olds.
Yes.
And teachers and administrators
And
even
parents.
parents welcoming them.
Yes.
That is a degenerate and satanic nation.
And then we decide, well, you aren't a boy anymore. You aren't a girl anymore. And so a few years ago, we were condemning African nations for genital mutilation, right? Now we celebrate it here in the United States of America. God bless America. Let's mangle the genitals of small children.
Doug, we're going to show it here in a few minutes. Joe Biden said today he wants to ban any state from banning the mutilation of children.
Yes.
This is the Democratic Party platform today, that they stand for the mutilation of children, for puberty blockers. This is the Democratic Party platform. Tell me that they're not demonic. But that's the same party. Remember years ago at the Democratic Convention that booed the mention of God 3 times?
Yes.
That's the day when the Democratic Party convention delegates booed the mention of God, and it happened 3 times on that night. That's the day I said, they've become demonic. This is not the old Democratic Party. This thing is demonic. It's evil. It's wicked. And so Putin, we covered this speech.
Yes.
The Times of London apparently just discovered it.
Right.
That speech is several weeks old, where Putin called us satanic. But he hit it. He said, this is what the West is doing, and we're not going to allow it in Russia.
And he say that the earmarks of it are the LGBT procedures and the movement. And he said, we're not going to have it here. We're not going to have parent 1, parent 2, parent 3 for kids. We're not going to roll out an LGBT agenda. We're not going to raise a pride flag. We're not going to have pride parades here in Russia. These aren't the things we're going to do.
And the Times of London admitted that in this next quote from the article.
So during a recent speech at the Grand Kremlin Palace in Moscow, Putin lashed out against the outright Satanism that he alleged was being promoted by American and European leaders. His face distorted with rage, the Russian leaders described the war in Ukraine as an existential struggle for humanity's collective soul. Putin claimed that the fruits of Satanism in Western countries were the promotion of LGBT issues in schools. He said, quote, "Do we really want perversions that lead to degradation and extinction to be imposed on children in our schools from the primary grades?" he asked. "Do we really want to have here in Russia parent number 1, number 2, number 3? A popular Kremlin propaganda trope, and according to the London Times here, is that people in many Western countries are forbidden by law from referring to mothers and fathers and must use numerical terms instead. Well, that's not a trope. That's not a trope.
That's the state of California.
Yeah.
That's not a trope. That's reality now.
You can't say things like pregnant woman anymore. You have to say birthing person.
We're seeing teachers, Christians, men and women who are Christians and employed as school teachers in public schools being fired.
Yes.
For refusing to submit to this perverted new Nazism sexuality. And Putin recognizes it, and the Times of London is trying to make their readers believe that's all propaganda. That's not happening. What is happening? And what Putin is saying is, we Russians are watching America. We see what's going on. We're following their news. We're following their culture. And we're not going to allow it here in Russia. And we know that NATO is encircling us because we're standing against them. We're standing against their godlessness. And they're coming after us. And this is not just a fight over Ukraine. This is a fight for our survival as a Christian culture.
He's right.
That's what he's saying. And so the Times of London is trying to say, well, he's just an old KGB agent who's using propaganda in his war. No, he truly believes that the West is demonic. And you know what? I'm a Westerner who also believes this culture has become demonic.
And it has. It
is satanic. It is demonic. It It is leading a global movement to install a worldwide regime that is in submission to Lucifer. That is their agenda. And people in the Russian church also know it.
Right. Maria Zakharova, the foreign ministry spokeswoman, lashed out recently at Britain and other countries that had imposed sanctions on Patriarch Kirill. He can't travel to some countries, Rick. Patriarch Kirill, he's the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. He's, they say, a key Kremlin ally. She said only Satanists could impose sanctions against the Patriarch, she said. Imagine if someone put sanctions on the Pope, Rick. Said to the Pope, you can't travel out of Italy.
Well, this Pope, it might be a good idea.
Right, I agree with you, but imagine someone saying that. There'd be outrage, of course. But of course, Russians are the bad guys right now, and they put sanctions on Patriarch Kirill, basically saying you can't leave Russia. You
the
can't
head
go
of the
in.
church.
Right, the head of the Orthodox Church globally, and that, you know, so that's because Russians are evil right now. Every Russian is evil.
So she's right. You'd have to be a Satanist to attack the head of a church. Who else would attack the head of a church other than Satan? So she's making a valid point.
Right.
If you're attacking the head of the church, then you yourself must be working for Satan.
Right, you're the enemy of the church, right? So,
Mr. Zelensky had some pointed words for his buddies over in Israel. I mean, the Jerusalem Post named him the #1 most influential Jew in the world, but he's upset with Israel because they're not openly giving him weapons.
yes, the case of biting the hand that feeds you. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Monday tore into Israel over its stance toward his country and the Russian invasion, charging that Moscow would not have been collaborating militarily with Iran if Jerusalem had not decided against sending military aid to Kiev. Mr. Zelensky was speaking by video to a conference organized by Haaretz Daily. He said the cooperation between Moscow and Tehran would not have occurred if Israeli leaders had agreed to help protect Ukraine's skies against Russian attacks that use Iranian drones. This alliance of theirs would simply not have happened if your politicians had made only one decision at the time, the decision we asked for, he said. Israel has maintained a strict policy of not providing military aid to Ukraine since Russian troops invaded back in February, including systems that could help it intercept Russian missile and drone attacks. And the reasoning behind the decision appears to be Israel's strategic need to maintain freedom of operations in Syria as part of its efforts to prevent Iranian entrenchment on its own doorstep. To that end, Israel cooperates with the Russian military, which largely controls Syria's airspace. But he's taking some big risks now, isn't he? Talking big to Israel now.
Yeah, he's shaming Israel.
He's using the same tactics that he's used against every Western outlet that he can get his face in front of.
Yeah. There'll be a day they're done with him.
Yes.
They've used him. There'll be a day they say, okay, you didn't get to spend the money that you siphoned off. You're out. And we'll get the money back. But they're using him, but they're going to get fed up with him because he's actually starting to think
he really is something.
Yeah, he's talking like he's somebody.
He really thinks he's Churchill now.
Yeah. So we'll see how that goes with his shame-talking Israel. Israel does not want to get pulled into this war, even though they're helping on the sidelines, but they really don't want to get pulled into it because, as this said, this was the times of Israel. Israel's basically had a gentleman's agreement with Putin.
Right, over Syria.
Over Syria. Putin has allowed Israel to bomb Syria. Israel's bombing the Iranian military positions in Syria. But why is Iran in Syria? Because the West tried to topple President Assad.
Right.
The Russians came in, stopped them, and then the Iranians came in.
Yes.
Okay. Iran wasn't sitting back saying, hey, we want to put troops in missiles in Syria. No, they went there because the West was doing to Syria what it does to other countries. Destabilizes them, topples the president, and then puts in a puppet government. And so that's why Iran's there. Why is Iran in Ukraine right now? Why are they involved in Ukraine? Because the West was trying to topple Putin.
Yes.
You know, so if the West would just stop its failed foreign policy that has not worked since the end of World War II, if they would just stop it, these other countries wouldn't be getting involved, because the other countries are getting involved because they're in opposition to the American-led foreign policy. And so if America would just get its nose out of everybody's business, just let countries run their own countries, not try to impose our values. We don't have any values now that I want to. I don't want.
Yes.
There's no American values that I want other nations to adopt. None.
Tell us,
none.
What values are we exporting to the world that anyone would want?
Perversion and corruption and war.
Those are our values.
Yes.
It's not freedom of speech, freedom of religion,
no.
Freedom of none of those things, because we restrict all those things here.
That's right.
We don't value those things, and we certainly don't export them. No, we export and extort nations into doing abortions and to doing pride events and everything else like that around the world.
Yeah. Well, Doc, while we're on topic of Israel, guess which nation could become very soon the leading supplier of liquefied natural gas to Europe now that the Russian pipeline got destroyed? Well, none other than Israel. This is I-24 News in Israel. It's published today. Prime Minister Lapid said Israel will be important gas supplier for Europe.
That's right, Rick.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes. So Israel's Prime Minister Yair Lapid said on Monday that the Jewish state will become an important gas supplier for Europe in the near future. He said this during a meeting in Tel Aviv with Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte. Lapid confirmed that Israel will sign on Thursday the agreement on its maritime border with Lebanon, negotiated under the aegis of the United States, which will pave the way for the exploitation of gas fields in the eastern Mediterranean. We're still 5 to 10 years before we can actually see the results of those gas fields, but it does put Israel in a unique position moving forward to tap into the Leviathan fields out there in the Mediterranean.
We got update on the U.S.-Saudi Arabia split. Wall Street Journal, U.S.-Saudi relations buckle driven by animosity between Biden and Mohammed bin Salman. And there's one paragraph in the Wall Street Journal report that I wanted to show our audience.
So, an unwritten pact binding the U.S. and Saudi Arabia has survived 15 presidents and 7 kings through an Arab oil embargo, 2 Persian Gulf Wars, and the September 11th terrorist attacks. Now it is fracturing under 2 leaders who don't like or trust each other. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the kingdom's 37-year-old day-to-day ruler, mocks President Biden in private, making fun of the 79-year-old's gaffes and questioning his mental acuity, according to people inside the Saudi government. He has told advisors he hasn't been impressed with Mr. Biden since his days as vice president and much preferred former President Donald Trump, the people said.
He's not impressed by him.
And apparently mocks him in private.
Doesn't think he's mentally competent right now to be president of the United States. Well, I wonder what gave him that impression. Do you think maybe a private meeting with Joe Biden?
Probably. And so, or it could be clips like you see here. Here is President Biden with an interview on NBC over the weekend. And you have to see this to believe this. It looks like the president fell asleep during the interview, Rick. Have you seen this yet?
I sure did. It was troubling.
It bothered me.
He did a...
it shocked the reporter.
Yes, it shocked the reporter. He had a brain freeze. And then was it NBC or MSNBC?
Well, I think it was a reporter for NBC, but it was on MSNBC.
But then the interviewer had to reboot Biden's brain. in the middle of an interview.
Right.
Yeah, let's watch it. It's sad.
The reason I'm not making a judgment about formally running or not running, once I make that judgment, a whole series of regulations kick in. And I treat myself as a candidate from that moment on. I have not made that formal decision, but it's my intention to run again. And we have time to make that decision.
Dr. Biden is for it. Mr. President. Oh.
Dr. Biden thinks that, my wife thinks that we're doing something very important and that I shouldn't walk away from it.
Joseph R. Biden, President of the United States, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan.
You notice they shut that interview down right there. I'm actually surprised they actually showed this clip, that they shared this clip. So why do you think they're showing this now, Rick?
Remember back at the beginning of the year, I said Biden's going to be a liability to the Democrats in this election. They can't take him out before, let me rephrase that word. They can't remove him from office. When I say take that sounds, I don't mean assassination or anything like that. I'm saying they couldn't force him to resign. They couldn't use the 25th Amendment to remove him from the White House. They couldn't do it before the election. They were saddled with Joe Biden going into this election. If they removed him before November, the Democratic Party would be led by Kamala Harris.
Right.
If you think Joe Biden's brain freezes are embarrassing to the Democrats,
wait till you hear the Kamala Harris word salads.
Yes, when her brain is fully active. You would want Kamala Harris's brain to freeze. That would be a good thing. But so, Doc, what I said at the beginning of this year was Joe Biden probably won't last much longer after the November election. I don't know how long, but I think we're going to hear talk that the family wants him to resign.
Well, and that's interesting because of this clip, because he was talking about, basically why he hasn't announced yet or anything like that. And then the reporter asked him, well, what does Dr. Biden think about that? And it was almost like he had to process that. And he went out. So I'm thinking that there is talk like that in the family going on even right now.
What is she a doctor of?
A doctor of education. So
she is?
She's a school teacher, and so I'm pretty sure it's a doctorate in education.
Is it? Okay.
So, but the fact that he had to put on the brakes and process the information, and the reporter, you heard the reporter say, almost like,
Mr. President,
did you doze off? Did you go, all right? Did you have a stroke? What's going on? So if that's going on just in day-to-day activities, Rick, if I was doing that, would you be worried about me?
Yeah, I would.
If I was sitting on set or sitting in the office and all of a sudden, I looked like I drifted off and didn't remember who my wife was.
Yes, you would be concerned.
Right.
And I've always said that with the Democrats and the media and his handlers that put him up to run, it was very cruel. I'm not a fan of Joe Biden, but I'm also not a fan of elder abuse. And that's elder abuse. The Democrats and the news media and the far left have committed elder abuse of Joe Biden. They knew he wasn't fit to be the President of the United States. Forget about his political views. I'm just talking about his mental stability. He wasn't fit to be the President of the United States of America. And they put him in the White House. That's why they kept him in the basement. They hid him throughout the 2020 campaign so the public would not see what we just saw.
Well, Rick, and on the other side of the spectrum, the times where he is lucid, where he is completely lucid, he is so far out in left field, he's beyond the home field fence. And example of this is they had an event over the weekend for the Now This media outlet, And it was supposed to be like a summit for youth and everything, obviously a pre-election push and stuff like that. And the conversation, they asked him a series of questions, 8 questions. One of them had to do with transgender rights that was going on. And so, and President Biden, in a moment of lucidity, gave a very clear explanation of where he stood as far as transgender rights are concerned. You know, there are states now that are talking about, cutting out gender-affirming health care and things like that, which should be absolutely okay at the state level, okay? But apparently Mr. Biden had something very clear he wanted to state about that. Now this is, this clip that you're going to see is a person, it's a woman, a man in a dress, okay, asking this question basically.
Okay, so we're getting back to the earlier conversation about Vladimir Putin,
Yes.
who says that we're satanic.
Right.
So when you watch this news clip, just look at the person that's interviewing the President of the United States and ask yourself, has America lost its mind? Have we gone crazy? Have we been turned over by God to a reprobate mind? This is, in 2022, what is recognized to be a news journalist qualified to interview the President of the United States.
Watch this.
Mr. President, this is my 221st day of publicly transitioning.
God love you.
Thank you. I am extremely privileged to live in a state that allows me access to the resources I need, and that decision is just between me and my doctors. But many states have lawmakers that feel like they can involve themselves in this very personal process. Do you think states should have a right to ban gender-affirming health care?
I don't think any state or anybody should have the right to do that. As a moral question and as a legal question. I just think it's wrong. You know, I think I was saying before we started that my son, my deceased son, used to be the Attorney General of the state of Delaware. He passed the broadest piece of legislation that he, as Attorney General, was able to convince the legislature and the governor to sign that dealt with all gender-affirming capability. I mean, there's a lot of, sometimes they try to block you from being able to access certain medicines, being able to access certain procedures, and so on. None of that should be available. I mean, no state should be able to do that, in my view. So I feel very, very strongly that you should have every single solitary right, including use of your gender identity bathrooms in public.
Thank you.
All right. Now, did you hear what he said? That's how far out in left field he is.
That's the leader of the free world.
Says
We're not free, are we?
No.
According to the Bible, we're not free. If that's your viewpoint, you're in bondage to sin. You're in bondage to Satan if you think that way.
He said, the President of the United States sat there and looked at a man in a dress and said, it's okay for you to use a woman's bathroom. That's a clown world that we live in now.
But that's a man who thinks it's okay to take a shower with your daughter.
Yes. Now,
That's a man who turned his son into a sex pervert and a drug addict in order to make business deals.
and you asked a great question while we're watching this, Rick. When did Beau Biden ever do all these things that Joe Biden said he did?
I never heard anything about Beau Biden has been dead for years. When did Delaware become a leader in gender transitioning?
I mean, if it's out there, show us. But I never.
But he said pass legislation. He was the Attorney General.
Yes.
Attorney Generals don't pass legislation. They rule on legislation.
Well,
I've got one more I want to show before we close up. I want to jump down to number 47 because Stacey Abrams, the far-left radical Democrat running for governor of Georgia, she was in a church in Georgia.
Which is, if you're a Democrat, you get to campaign in churches.
Yes.
How does that work?
Republicans are not allowed to campaign in churches, but Democrats can. In fact, Democrats can actually raise money in churches. They'll pass They'll pass buckets and raise donations in churches.
Yes.
But the Republicans, they can't. They'll get turned into the IRS. But that's another story. What is outrageous in this story is that she was invited to a church to tell the congregation that Christianity supports the murder of unborn babies. I'm telling you, she had to be glad a lightning bolt did not strike her in that church. Let's watch.
And for those in this room who are women, I come from a tradition of faith. And I believe that I have the right to control my body and control my future, and that belongs to me alone. And I don't want to make the choice for anybody else, but I don't want some man who's never met me in my doctor's office with me. And in the tradition of Esther and Deborah and Ruth, of Mary and Martha, it took men to break this place. It's going to take a woman to put it right. But we've got 23 days to determine that we deserve more. You see, everything I've listed, every item I itemized, if you go to my website, there's a spreadsheet. And it says that we can do everything I've said without raising a dime in taxes. But they don't want you to believe that, because it's easier to scare us into poverty than to help us into prosperity. But I reject poverty thinking. I believe that God's grace shines on all of us, but too many of us are in the shadows. I was recently reading the book of Lamentations, and it's an interesting 5 books. When you read the 5 chapters, it's about being under siege. It's about Judah being under siege and being told there isn't enough for everyone, so you are going to have to starve. Starve of food, starve of opportunity, starve of freedom. But the book of Lamentations is about reminding us that even in siege, we have an opportunity to see the future, that we have the chance to rise up and have more. And voting is how we do that in a democracy. Over the next 23 days, we can decide who we intend to be. Do we want to serve each other, or do we want to serve those who would keep us subservient? For me in my house, I plan to vote. I plan to speak my truth aloud. I plan to make sure that our children have a future they can see.
Well, there is so much to unpack in that. We could just spend the hour just talking about that, Rick.
Well, Doc, Stacey Abrams is the honorary chairwoman of the Dead Baby Democrats. Now, this is a woman that last week said, for families to fight inflation and reduce their food bills, you should kill your baby.
Right.
She said it. Don't anybody write, any of you left-wingers watching me, say she didn't say, she did say it. She said abortion is the way to cut family costs of living. Kill your baby.
Right.
If prices are too high, kill your baby.
Right. And she listed all the noble biblical women in her diatribe there. She mentioned Esther. Esther didn't kill babies. Deborah didn't kill babies. Mary, Martha, they didn't kill babies. Aren't you glad they didn't kill babies, or we wouldn't have the lineage of Christ today? And so,
wow. And
the whole thing on Lamentations there, Rick, saying that, the Democrats are under siege. You don't understand that the book of Lamentations is about a self-imposed siege upon the sin and wickedness of Judah. The reason why they were under siege is because they were wicked.
Yes.
Not because they were trying to celebrate or get out the vote. I mean, I've never understood, and God bless, I've got some great black brethren. I've never understood the idea of being able to bring in these Democrat candidates into these wonderful black churches, and they can say whatever they want to say.
Well, Doc, it's true, but we also bring Republican candidates into churches, and they promote Zionism and war.
Yep.
And it's just as reprehensible to God.
Yes.
Reprehensible in the eyes and the ears of the Lord.
Yes.
So
it cuts both ways. I agree. So
You know, Spurgeon would not allow politics in his church. McLaurin would not allow politics in his church. They said, when you come to church, you're here for one purpose, to worship God and to hear about his kingdom.
Yes.
And their view was, if you know about his kingdom, you'll vote the right way.
Right.
Maybe
you certainly didn't have to bring the polling booth into the pulpit.
So maybe we should get back to that principle used by Spurgeon and McLaurin and other great preachers of the gospel who said, I'm going to focus on teaching the word to people, and their conscience will direct them when they go vote. Hey, as we get ready to close, I've had this on my desk, okay?
What is that, Rick?
Well, it's a FedEx. This came in a couple hours ago, okay? And it says it's from the Royal Hashemite Court in Amman, Jordan.
Oh, the King's Court in Jordan.
This is from the king. This is from King Abdullah. Somebody in his palace sent this to me. It is addressed to me, right?
Mr. Richard Wiles, yes.
All right.
So,
okay. I know I think I do. I was told what was going to be in it. I hope it's what I was told. But I've been waiting all day to open it up. I wanted it to open up in front of you so we can all see this together. But I was told in a phone call this was on its way. Okay, there is the envelope. All right. So there's the king's crown.
Got the.
There's the king's crown on the back of the envelope. Okay. You want to read it?
Sure. Wow. All right. So, by order of His Majesty, King Abdullah ibn al-Hussein, the Chief of Royal Protocol cordially invites Mr. Richard Wiles to attend the Baptism Development Zone's inaugural event at the King Hussein bin Talal Convention Center at the Dead Sea in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan on the evening of Wednesday, December 7th, 2022. Rick, you received a royal invitation from the King of Jordan.
I did.
So, right there.
That's amazing.
Congratulations, Rick.
Thank you. This is quite an honor. When I was in Jordan, how long has it been? A month? A month ago?
About a month, yes.
So when I was in Jordan, I had a meeting with a high-level government official who gave me a private briefing about the plans to develop the land around the baptismal site of Jesus on the Jordanian side of the river, which is where he was baptized. Okay. Most of the Christians in America go to the Israeli side, which is actually occupied West Bank, and they go to the Israeli side of the Jordan River. Right. But Jesus was baptized on the Jordan side of the Jordan River.
Right.
And there's an actual spot you can go to, and there is plenty of historical evidence that that spot right there is where he was baptized. I was privileged to be given a briefing by the gentleman who is in King Abdullah's government and leading this effort. I'm not going to give it away. I'm just going to tell you that the government of Jordan is boldly moving to not only preserve the baptismal site of Jesus Christ, but to turn it into a world-class place for Christians to come visit.
Yes.
It's out there in the wilderness, okay? It's like so many of the sites that Doc and I saw. Ancient biblical sites, things that we could open up the Bible and show you and say, we were there, we stood there.
Yes.
And there's still ruins there. You can see it. Well, the same with the baptismal site. There's an actual spot where we know Jesus was baptized at this very spot. And so the King Abdullah, bless him, he's a good man. He desires to preserve that spot and to develop it and to make it a pleasant place for Christians to come and visit baptismal site of Jordan, of Jesus Christ. And then not too far away is Mount Nebo, where Moses saw the promised land.
Right.
And then not too far from it is Macaris, where John the Baptist was beheaded.
Yes.
They're all three in that same triangle. And so the government of King Abdullah has some very bold plans to promote Christian tourism in Jordan. So I was told when I was in Jordan that the king was going to invite me to a very special event. I was told 500 people will be at this event. And it is going to be at the King Hussein bin Talal Convention Center at the Dead Sea. And it's on December 7th of 2022. And so God willing, I'm going to fly back to Jordan because we're going to Jordan.
About 3 weeks.
Is it that?
Yes.
I think it's less than 3 weeks, isn't it?
Oh, don't say that, because now you'll scare me. You'll scare
You
me.
might want to look at your calendar, okay? So,
But it's coming up quickly.
yeah, it's coming quickly. And then when I get back, Doc and I will get back here around the 17th, 18th. Then December 6th, I'll fly back out. I'll fly back out to Jordan. Do you all remember several years ago, 2018, the Holy Spirit told me to pray for King Abdullah. And I did. I started praying for him on a regular basis. Friends, look at where this is at right now. Doc, did you ever think
No.
that this would happen?
So when you say prayer changes things,
Yes.
Now I'm waiting for a letter from George Soros today too.
Yeah.
You never know now.
Oh yeah, yeah.
'Cause,
And I'm
we've
going
been
to
praying for George Soros.
If that
So-
happens, then I'm going to witness the gospel of Christ to George Soros.
But that's an amazing invitation there, Rick. Congratulations, and God has opened some amazing doors. We always pray when we go on trips for divine appointments and divine opportunities, and He's provided that for you.
But Doc, when I go,
who would have thought? So,
look, I'm representing this entire True News audience because they're the ones who sent us.
yes,
They're the ones, those of you who contribute to us, you're the ones who made it possible for Doc and me to go to Jordan to start with. Look how much has changed in several, when did we go?
April.
It was April. May, June, July, August, September, October. 6 months. 6 months. And we're at a place now of a royal invitation to a private event with the king.
Where will we be 6 months from now?
Well, we're just going to keep walking through the doors. We're just going to keep obeying God.
And keep showing up.
We're going to keep showing up every day, and we're going to keep believing and praising and worshiping the Lord. Don't underestimate what God can do for you. Love you very much. Thank you for everything that you've done for us. God willing, Doc and I will be back here tomorrow.
God bless you.